A successful businessman encountered his twin children at the airport without knowing they were his. When their eyes met, he felt an inexplicable connection. Secrets kept for years came to light, and their lives changed forever in a way no one could have predicted. A story of discovery, transformation, and true love. Prepare yourself, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like on this video and comment where you're watching from. Los Angeles International Airport gleamed under the golden light of sunset. The enormous glass windows reflected the orange-tinted sky as the last rays of sun filtered through the clouds, creating a spectacle of light and shadow on the polished marble floor. Thaddeus Blackwood, with his impeccable custom-tailored charcoal gray suit, walked with the confidence that only comes from 38 years of uninterrupted success and a fortune built brick by brick in the competitive world of real estate development. At his side, Brielle Rothschild moved with the grace befitting her 28 years, her elegant emerald dress contrasting with the sobriety of the airport environment. The engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond mounted in platinum, sparkled on her left ring finger, catching flashes of light with each movement. The young couple attracted discreet glances as they advanced toward the international departure gate. "I'll be back in 3 days, just in time for dinner with the Montgomerys," said Thaddeus, consulting his platinum watch. An automatic gesture he repeated, even when he didn't need to know the time. He was a man who measured his life in productive minutes, in signed contracts, in buildings constructed. "I'll be waiting," replied Brielle, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle on her future husband's lapel. "I'll take the opportunity to finalize the details of the guest list." That's when it happened. As if fate had meticulously calculated that precise moment, the crowd momentarily parted before them, revealing an image that hit Thaddeus with the force of a hurricane. Less than 20 meters away, next to the souvenir shop, Seren Winters, his ex-wife, the woman with whom he had shared 8 years of marriage before a divorce as swift as it was final, held the hands of 2 small boys of approximately 5 years old. 2 identical faces. 2 pairs of eyes that, even at a distance, were unmistakably a reflection of his own. Thaddeus felt the world come to a halt. The airport's bustle transformed into a distant buzz as a thought crystallized in his mind with devastating clarity. Sometimes the deepest secrets aren't buried in darkness, but waiting in broad daylight to crumble the certainties upon which we build our lives. Time froze in that instant. His breathing stopped. 6 years after the divorce, there was the evidence of something he had never imagined. The boys, with their small navy blue shirts and identical pants, were miniature copies of his own childhood photographs. There was no room for doubt. When Seren's eyes met his across the crowd, mutual recognition triggered an instant reaction. Horror, surprise, and something akin to resignation crossed her face. Without thinking, Thaddeus took a step forward, but Seren was already in motion, hurrying the children in the opposite direction, disappearing into the crowd like a mirage vanishing under the desert sun. "Thaddeus? What's wrong?" Brielle's concerned voice barely registered in his consciousness. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," he murmured, his voice strangely distant. "My future." Thaddeus Blackwood's office occupied the top floor of Blackwood Tower, a 40-story skyscraper he had designed and built 5 years earlier. From the floor-to-ceiling windows that formed the exterior walls, Los Angeles stretched like an empire at his feet, an urban landscape that bore his imprint in every new construction that had transformed the city's skyline over the last decade. 3 days had passed since the encounter at the airport, and Thaddeus hadn't boarded any plane. The meeting in San Francisco with Norwegian investors had been postponed indefinitely, a decision that had surprised his team, accustomed to his unwavering professional commitment. Instead, he had been sitting in his Italian leather chair, contemplating the city while his mind tried to process the revelation that had shattered the perfectly ordered structure of his existence. Percival York, his personal assistant for the past 12 years, entered noiselessly, placing a cup of black coffee on the glass and titanium desk. "I've located Ms. Winter's current address," he announced with the efficiency that characterized his every action. "She lives in San Diego in the North Park neighborhood. She works as a literature professor at UCSD. The children are enrolled at Bayside International Academy." Thaddeus nodded slowly, without taking his gaze from the horizon. "What else?" "She moved there 5 years ago, shortly after the divorce. There are no records of the children in Los Angeles." It appears the pregnancy and birth occurred after her relocation. Percival paused. The boys are named Griffin and Gideon Winters. They were born 5 years and 4 months ago. No paternal name appears on their birth certificates. The mathematics was merciless. Conceived just before the divorce, born when the marriage was already history. Thaddeus closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the last months of his relationship with Seren. The growing distance, the increasingly frequent arguments about his priorities, his obsession with work that kept him absent for weeks at a time. Her words now resonated with painful clarity. You live as if only your next project exists. There's no room in your life for anything else. And he had responded, with the arrogance that success bestows. That's precisely how I've built everything we have. Sir? Percival's voice brought him back to the present. Ms. Rothschild has called 3 times this morning. I'm not available to anyone, Percival. Absolutely no one. When the door closed, Thaddeus finally directed his gaze to the only personal object decorating his office, a black and white photograph of his parents. Harrison Blackwood, a builder who had started with a small renovation company, and Eleanor Reed, the woman who had sacrificed her career as a pianist to support her husband's dreams. Both had died in a car accident when Thaddeus was 25, leaving him a modest company that he had transformed into an empire. Someday you'll understand that true wealth isn't measured in properties, his mother had once told him. Thaddeus had always interpreted those words as a poetic way of talking about personal satisfaction. Now, for the first time, he wondered if there was something deeper in that advice. With calculated movements, he took his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 6 years. "We need to talk," he said, when Seren's voice answered on the other end. It wasn't a request, but a statement of intent. "I'll be in San Diego tomorrow." The Balboa Park Cafe was located on a quiet corner facing the lush greenery that gave it its name. Seren Winters, with her chestnut hair gathered in a casual bun and her thin-framed glasses, looked more like a distant academic than the passionate woman Thaddeus had met 15 years earlier at a symposium on sustainable architecture. Sitting across from him, she stirred a herbal tea that she had barely tasted. "You had no right," Thaddeus began, controlling the tone of his voice to avoid attracting the attention of other customers. 5 years, Seren. 5 years of their lives that I can never get back." She raised her gaze. Her amber eyes, always expressive, showed a mixture of weariness and determination. "Right," she responded with a calmness that contrasted with the evident tension in her shoulders. "When I discovered I was pregnant, it had been 2 weeks since you had signed the divorce papers, with the same efficiency with which you sign your $1 million contracts. You didn't even give me time to process it. You didn't know you were pregnant when you filed for divorce." "No, I didn't, but I knew I was married to a man who had made it clear that children weren't part of his 5-year corporate expansion plan." Seren let out a sigh. "The last time I mentioned the possibility of starting a family, you told me maybe in a few years, when you stabilized the company in Asia. It was always in a few years, Thaddeus. There was always a new market to conquer, a new building to design." Silence settled between them, as familiar as it was uncomfortable. Thaddeus remembered perfectly those postponed conversations, always delayed in favor of an international conference or a crucial negotiation. Now those seemingly logical decisions at the time revealed themselves as the biggest mistakes of his life. "You should have told me," he insisted, though with less conviction. "For what?" "So you could offer me a generous alimony while you continued building your empire on another continent. To subject us to shared custody that would mean my children growing up between suitcases and airports." Seren shook her head. "My father was like you, Thaddeus. A brilliant and absent man who loved us intensely during the 3 days a month he was present. I didn't want that for Griffin and Gideon." Thaddeus contemplated the woman before him. The distance between them was no longer measured just in miles or years, but in incompatible visions of what a full life meant. For him it had always been professional excellence, recognition, constant expansion. For her, apparently, something completely different. "I want to meet them," he finally declared. "They're not a new business project, Thaddeus. You can't simply decide that now you want to be a father and expect everything to adjust to your schedule. They're my children. They're 5-year-old boys who have never heard of you, who have a stable and happy life, and who don't need a stranger suddenly appearing and claiming paternal rights." Seren slightly softened her tone. If you really care about them, you'll need patience. Much more than you've ever had to exercise in your life. Thaddeus felt a mixture of frustration and powerlessness, emotions he wasn't accustomed to. In his world, problems had clear solutions, obstacles could be overcome with sufficient resources, and negotiations always reached a point of agreement when the right incentive was offered. But this was different. "I'll do whatever is necessary," he finally said. Serene looked at him for a long time, as if evaluating the sincerity of those words. "We'll start with small steps. I'll tell them that an old friend of mine wants to meet them. I won't mention anything else until they're ready." She stood up, leaving a bill on the table to pay for her tea. "On Sunday we have a picnic in Balboa Park, at 11. If you're really willing to do things my way, you can come. Just you, Thaddeus. Not your lawyers, not your fiancé, not your assistants. Just the man, not the businessman." As Serene walked away, Thaddeus remained seated, contemplating his untouched cup of coffee. For the first time in decades, he didn't have a strategic plan. There was no clear roadmap to his objective. There was only the certainty that everything he had considered important until then had been reconfigured in an instant at that airport. His phone vibrated with a notification, a scheduled video call with the Norwegian investors in 15 minutes. The reminder of a world that kept turning while his had stopped. With a gesture unusual for him, he turned off the device and put it in his pocket. Sometimes life's true opportunities don't appear in the form of contracts or investments, but as invitations to picnics in unfamiliar parks, with non-negotiable terms and an uncertain future. The presidential suite at the U.S. Grant Hotel offered panoramic views of downtown San Diego and the bay beyond. Sitting on the minimalist design sofa, Thaddeus contemplated the historic gas lamp quarter, while Brielle paced back and forth, her slender figure silhouetted against the window like a restless shadow. "I can't believe you cancelled our dinner with the Montgomerys without consulting me," she said, holding a glass of white wine she had barely tasted. "Savannah has been organizing that evening for weeks to introduce us to the Cultural Foundation executives. You know how important that is for my project." Brielle Rothschild came from one of the most influential families in Los Angeles, heiress to a fortune built in the publishing world and passionate about contemporary art. Her relationship with Thaddeus, which had begun 18 months ago during a charity event, had been celebrated in social circles as the perfect union: beauty, youth, and cultural connections combined with economic power and business vision. "I had urgent matters to attend to here," Thaddeus replied, aware of how inadequate that explanation was. "So urgent that you couldn't mention it to me?" Brielle put her glass down on the coffee table with a sharp tap. "Thaddeus, we've been in San Diego for 3 days. You've disappeared for hours without explanation. You cancelled your trip to San Francisco. You're ignoring calls from important partners. This isn't you." Thaddeus observed her, suddenly aware of how little Brielle really knew about him. Their relationship, built on foundations of mutual admiration and social compatibility, had never required deep explorations of his fears, dreams, or regrets. She had fit perfectly into his life, like an elegant and functional complement to his public image. "There's something I need to tell you," he finally said, indicating the empty space beside him on the sofa. Brielle sat down, her expression transitioning from irritation to concern. During the next few minutes, she listened in silence as Thaddeus related the encounter at the airport, the conversation with Serene, the existence of Griffin and Gideon. "You have children?" Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. "5-year-old children you never mentioned?" "I didn't know," he clarified. "I swear to you, Brielle. I found out 3 days ago, just like you are now." She got up again, walking to the window. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the white buildings of the city with a reddish-golden hue. "We always talked about having 2 children," she said, after a long silence. "After 3 years of marriage, when the company was stabilized in Asia, and I had completed my master's in cultural management, that was our plan." She turned to look at him. "Now it turns out you already have 2 children. With another woman, a secret family that suddenly appears." "It's not a secret family, Brielle. I didn't know. That doesn't change the fact that they exist." Her green eyes reflected a mixture of confusion and pain. "What do you plan to do now?" The question hung suspended between them. Thaddeus realized that for the first time in his adult life, he didn't have a clear and structured answer. "I need to meet them," he finally said. "Tomorrow, I'll meet with them in a park. It will just be an informal meeting as a friend of their mother." "And after that?" "After that," Thaddeus left the sentence unfinished. The truth was that he didn't know how this story would continue, how this new chapter would fit into the carefully constructed narrative of his life. Brielle nodded slowly, as if that absence of plan confirmed her fears. "I need time to process this," she said, picking up her purse. "I'll return to Los Angeles tonight. When you have clarity about what you want to do with your life, with our life, call me." Thaddeus didn't try to stop her. Part of him perfectly understood her reaction. Another part, one that was just beginning to awaken, felt a strange relief at being able to focus exclusively on the challenge ahead, without having to simultaneously manage his fiancée's expectations. When the door closed behind Brielle, Thaddeus approached his briefcase and extracted a folder. Inside were 2 photographs that Percival had obtained, Griffin and Gideon in their school playground, smiling at the camera with identical expressions of carefree joy. For the first time, he studied their faces carefully, looking for not only the reflection of his own features in them, but also clues about their personalities. The phone rang, showing Alaric Chandler's name on the screen, his principal partner. It was the 5th call he had received from him that day, probably related to the expansion offer in Singapore that they had to confirm before the weekend. A $50 million decision that until a week ago would have been his absolute priority. Thaddeus turned off the phone and continued observing the photographs of his children, aware that something fundamental was changing within him. We spend our lives building fortresses so impenetrable that sometimes we forget what we built them for in the first place, until a simple chance encounter reminds us that true riches cannot be stored in vaults or accounted for in annual balance sheets. Balboa Park stretched like a green artery through San Diego, an urban oasis of gardens, sports areas, and children's playgrounds. Thaddeus, dressed in jeans and a casual blue shirt, attire he hadn't worn in years, felt strangely vulnerable as he walked among families enjoying the sunny Sunday. He spotted them before they saw him. Seren had spread a colorful blanket under a jacaranda tree, and the twins were running around, chasing each other with what looked like plastic swords. Even from a distance, Thaddeus could distinguish the subtle differences between them. One seemed slightly taller, the other gestured more intensely when speaking. He paused for a moment, observing them. The scene had a dreamlike quality, as if he were contemplating an alternative life, a path not taken that was now materializing before him. He took a deep breath and continued walking. Seren saw him first. She sat up slightly, making a discreet gesture to indicate that he should approach. The boys, absorbed in their game, took a few seconds to notice the stranger's presence. "Hello," said Thaddeus, with a voice he didn't recognize as his own, softened by an emotion he couldn't name. Seren smiled, a tense but sincere smile. "Griffin, Gideon, this is Thaddeus. He's an old friend of mine." The twins looked at him with the direct curiosity of childhood. One of them, the slightly taller one, stepped forward. "Are you an architect like Mom?" he asked, studying him intensely. "Yes," Thaddeus replied, surprised. "Has your mother told you about architecture?" "Mom teaches literature, but she used to design buildings," interjected the other boy, also approaching. "She has many books with drawings of houses and bridges. I want to build bridges when I grow up." Seren gestured for Thaddeus to sit down. "Griffin is obsessed with bridges lately," she explained, "and Gideon wants to be an astronaut this week. Last week he was a paleontologist." The conversation flowed with a naturalness that Thaddeus hadn't anticipated. The twins, initially cautious, soon began to bombard him with questions about the tallest buildings he had seen, if he had built skyscrapers, if he knew the architects of the Salk Institute. Thaddeus answered patiently, discovering a capacity to simplify complex concepts that he didn't know he possessed. As Seren took out sandwiches and juices from a picnic basket, Griffin sat next to Thaddeus and, without warning, showed him a small scar on his wrist. "I got it when I was 4 years old. I fell off the swing. They had to put in 3 stitches, but I didn't cry." "Yes, you did," corrected Gideon, joining them. "How you cried until Mom gave you a chocolate ice cream. That's not true." "Yes, it is." Seren intervened before the discussion escalated. "You were both very brave that day, and you both got ice cream." Thaddeus observed the exchange with fascination. There was something deeply familiar in the way Griffin frowned when contradicted, a gesture he himself had seen in childhood photographs. "Do you want to see us do a somersault?" asked Gideon, already on his feet and ready for the demonstration. "It's not a real somersault," clarified Seren with a resigned smile. "It's more of an uncoordinated tumble, but they're convinced it's an Olympic feat." For the next hour, Thaddeus was witness to and participant in a completely new type of interaction for him. He helped the twins build a fort with fallen branches, applauded their somersaults, listened attentively to their confusing but enthusiastic explanations about dinosaurs and planets. In every gesture, in every expression, he discovered echoes of himself, but also unique traits that belonged exclusively to them. When the time finally came to say goodbye, an unexpected sense of loss invaded him. "Will you come visit us again?" asked Griffin, as they gathered the picnic things. Thaddeus looked at Seren, seeking some sign. She nodded slightly. "I'd like that very much," he responded. "We could show you the dinosaur park next time," suggested Gideon. "It has a T-Rex that moves its head and roars." "Sounds impressive," said Thaddeus, surprised by the sincerity of his enthusiasm. As he watched them walk away down the park path, the twins walking ahead with inexhaustible energy, and Seren following them with a calm pace, Thaddeus experienced a clarity that had been absent from his life for years. He had no name for that feeling, but he recognized its transformative power. His phone, which he had kept on silent during the entire meeting, vibrated in his pocket. 37 missed calls, 42 messages, most related to the crisis his absence was generating in the company. The outside world urgently demanded his attention. For the first time, Thaddeus found himself questioning his priorities, not as a theoretical work-life balance exercise, but as a real and urgent existential decision. Perhaps true architecture isn't about designing steel and glass structures that defy gravity, but about building invisible bridges that connect hearts separated by time and circumstances. The Blackwood Development's boardroom occupied the entire northwest corner of the 30th floor of Blackwood Tower. 18 executives waited in tense silence as Thaddeus reviewed the reports that Percival had prepared. Through the windows, Los Angeles stretched infinitely under a leaden sky that threatened storm. "The projections for the third quarter show a worrying deceleration," pointed out Alaric Chandler, founding partner and the only survivor of the original team with which Thaddeus had started the company 15 years ago. "The Norwegian investors have withdrawn their offer for the San Francisco project after your sudden cancellation. And the Singapore consortium is considering other options." Thaddeus nodded, turning the pages of the report with apparent calm. Internally, he struggled to concentrate. His mind kept returning to San Diego, to the synchronized laughter of Griffin and Gideon when they had built a tower of stones together by the lake during his second visit. "The problem isn't the numbers," continued Alaric, his voice tensing slightly. "The problem is perception. 3 last-minute cancellations in 2 weeks, meetings postponed indefinitely, crucial decisions on hold. Rumors spread quickly in our sector, Thaddeus." "What rumors exactly?" he asked, finally looking up from the report. An uncomfortable silence settled in the room. It was Octavia Harrington, financial director, who finally spoke. "There are speculations about health problems," she said with professional caution. "Others suggest hidden financial difficulties. Lockhart Investments has been probing our minority shareholders, offering to buy their stakes with a 20% premium." Lockhart Investments. The real estate giant, led by Darius Lockhart, his most aggressive competitor and the man who had unsuccessfully tried to acquire Blackwood Developments on 3 occasions during the last decade. "A hostile takeover," murmured Thaddeus, more to himself than to those present. "It's a real possibility if the instability continues," confirmed Octavia. "We need a clear strategy and your visible presence to calm the markets." Thaddeus closed the report folder. For 15 years, his life had revolved exclusively around that table, those decisions. That urban horizon he contemplated each morning like a chessboard, where every move was calculated with mathematical precision. His identity was so intertwined with Blackwood Developments that the mere idea of losing the company was unthinkable. And yet, for the past month, another life had begun to take shape. A life marked by weekly visits to San Diego, by afternoons in parks and museums, by small discoveries about the unique personalities of his children. Griffin's passion for drawing, Gideon's ability to invent fantastic stories, the way both wrinkled their noses exactly the same when something displeased them. "I'll take control of the situation," he finally announced. "We'll resume contact with the Norwegians, and I'll schedule a personal visit to Singapore next week. Percival will prepare a statement for our shareholders, clarifying that the company is in a phase of strategic restructuring, not crisis." The faces around the table visibly relaxed. Thaddeus Blackwood was once again the decisive leader they all knew. What he didn't mention was the call he had received that morning from Seren. Griffin had been selected to represent his school in a regional mathematics competition that would be held on exactly the same day he now promised to be in Singapore. Bayside International Academy buzzed with activity that sunny afternoon. Parents, teachers, and students gathered in the auditorium for the interscholastic mathematics competition. Thaddeus, seated in the last row, tried to go unnoticed as he watched Griffin on the stage, concentrating in front of the whiteboard where he was solving an equation. "I didn't expect to see you here," whispered Seren, sliding into the empty seat beside him. "I thought you'd be in Asia." "I changed my plans," he replied without taking his eyes off Griffin. "I didn't want to miss this." Seren studied him in silence. During the last month, she had witnessed Thaddeus's gradual transformation. Fewer formal suits, fewer calls interrupting his visits, more questions about the routines and preferences of the children. "The twins ask about you between visits," she commented. "Gideon mentioned yesterday that you're different from their other uncles. He says you really listen when he talks, not just nod while looking at your phone." Thaddeus felt an unexpected warmth at that simple comment. It was true. He had discovered that when he was with the children, his usual impulse to check emails or take calls vanished. He was present in a way he rarely experienced in other contexts. A burst of applause interrupted his thoughts. Griffin had finished his problem before the other competitors and was smiling shyly as the jury verified his solution. "He's brilliant," murmured Thaddeus. "They both are, in different ways," replied Seren. "Gideon has an extraordinary imagination. He invents complex stories and draws detailed maps of invented places. Griffin is more methodical. He loves patterns and puzzles." Thaddeus nodded, absorbing this information as if it were as valuable as any financial report. Each new detail about his children was a treasure he cherished. "Brielle called me yesterday," Seren said suddenly. Thaddeus turned to her, surprised. "Brielle called you? Why?" "She wanted to meet me," replied Seren with a slight smile. "It was an interesting conversation. She asked me what you were like when we were married, if you had always been so intense with work." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth, that you were exactly the same then. Brilliant, ambitious, completely dedicated to your vision." She paused. "I also told her that you're changing, that I see something in you that I never saw during our marriage." Thaddeus wanted to ask what exactly Seren saw in him now, but at that moment they announced that Griffin had won first prize. The boy searched among the audience and, upon locating his mother, smiled broadly. Then his gaze shifted toward Thaddeus and his smile intensified, raising the trophy in his direction with a gesture of shared triumph. It was a fleeting moment, just a few seconds, but for Thaddeus it contained a profound meaning that he couldn't have articulated in words. For the first time, he felt that there was something in his life more important than any building he had constructed or any contract he had signed. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Alaric. "Darius Lockhart has increased his offer. Emergency meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Thaddeus looked at the message, then at Griffin receiving congratulations on the stage, and finally at Seren, who was observing him with an expression that suggested she perfectly understood the conflict developing inside him. "Go," she said softly. "They understand that you have responsibilities." "They're not just responsibilities," replied Thaddeus. "It's an entire life built brick by brick. I can't simply abandon it. No one is asking you to. Just to build space for something more." As they headed to the exit after the ceremony, Griffin ran toward them, proudly holding his trophy. "Did you see? I solved the sequence problem before everyone else." "I saw," confirmed Thaddeus, kneeling to be at his height. "You were incredible. That last equation was really difficult." "Not for me," replied Griffin, with a confidence that was an exact reflection of Thaddeus's. "Numbers are easy when you find the pattern. "Can you come home?" interjected Gideon, suddenly appearing. "Mama's made chocolate cake to celebrate, and I want to show you my new drawing of the space castle." Thaddeus looked at the twins, then at Seren, and finally at his phone where Alaric's message was still visible on the screen. "I'd love to," he finally said, putting the phone away without responding to the message. "I wouldn't miss chocolate cake for anything in the world." Sometimes true courage isn't about conquering new markets or closing million-dollar deals, but about daring to choose a piece of chocolate cake over an emergency meeting, knowing exactly what that choice might cost. The conference room at Ruddy Children's Hospital in San Diego maintained that chromatic neutrality characteristic of medical spaces. Dr. Westbrook, a pediatric neurologist with 30 years of experience, pointed to different areas in the brain images projected on the screen. Seren, seated next to Thaddeus, listened with the concentrated attention of someone who has processed complex medical information for years. "The absent seizures that Gideon has experienced are quite common in children his age," explained the specialist. "The episodes are brief, generally lasting less than 20 seconds, and are characterized by a momentary disconnection from the environment. The child appears to be absent, with a fixed gaze, not responding to stimuli." "Is it epilepsy?" asked Thaddeus, studying the images intensely. "It is a form of epilepsy, yes, but one of the most benign and treatable," responded the doctor. "The genetic tests confirm a hereditary predisposition." "Are there any family antecedents of epilepsy or similar neurological disorders?" Thaddeus exchanged a glance with Seren before responding. "My maternal uncle had similar episodes during his childhood. They resolved during adolescence, according to what my mother told me." Dr. Westbrook nodded, making notes on his tablet. "That is consistent with the genetic pattern we observe. With the appropriate treatment, Gideon can lead a completely normal life. We'll begin with a low dose of ethosuximide and monitor his evolution." While the doctor detailed the treatment plan, Thaddeus observed his son's brain images, those constellations of neuronal activity that revealed so much and so little at the same time. It was strange to think that there was an invisible link between him and Gideon, a genetic predisposition transmitted through generations, an inheritance that went far beyond evident physical traits. Upon leaving the consultation, they found Griffin and Gideon in the pediatric waiting room, drawing under the supervision of a nurse. Gideon jumped from his seat upon seeing them, running toward them with a drawing in his hand. "Look what I made. It's a hospital for dinosaurs because they get sick sometimes too." Thaddeus took the drawing, studying it with genuine admiration. The stroke was surprisingly detailed for a 5-year-old child, with dinosaurs of different species receiving medical attention from what appeared to be other dinosaurs in white coats. "It's extraordinary, Gideon. I love how you've drawn the different rooms of the hospital." The boy smiled, pleased by the recognition. Nothing in his happy expression suggested that he was aware of the neurological condition they had just discussed in the medical consultation. "The nurse says I could be a doctor when I grow up if I want to," he commented as they left the hospital. "You could be an excellent doctor," confirmed Thaddeus. "Although a few weeks ago you wanted to be an astronaut, remember?" "I can be an astronaut, doctor," responded Gideon with the irrefutable logic of childhood. "That way I can cure aliens when we discover them." In the parking lot, Seren stopped next to her vehicle. "Thank you for coming," she said, as the children headed toward the car. "You didn't have to, considering everything that's happening in Los Angeles." Thaddeus shook his head. "I needed to be here." The situation with Blackwood Developments had reached a critical point. Darius Lockhart's hostile takeover offer was gaining support among minority shareholders, uneasy about the changes in Thaddeus's behavior. His absence at key moments during the last few weeks had fueled speculation about hidden financial problems or undisclosed health issues. "How's the situation with your company?" asked Seren, as if she had read his thoughts. "Complicated," admitted Thaddeus. "I've delegated the negotiation with the Singaporeans to Alaric, something I've never done before. And I've had to reduce my participation in the Dubai project to weekly follow-up calls. That must be difficult for you?" Thaddeus smiled slightly. "The strange thing is that it isn't as much as I would have imagined, or at least not in the way I expected." He paused, searching for the right words. "For years I believed I was indispensable for every decision, every meeting, every negotiation. It turns out the world keeps turning when I'm not everywhere at once." Serene looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and something akin to admiration. "That's a lesson some never learn," she commented. "It doesn't mean I'm willing to lose the company," clarified Thaddeus. "I'm still responsible for thousands of employees, for projects that change entire cities. I'm simply reconfiguring my priorities." Serene's gaze turned toward the twins, who were now trying to catch a butterfly fluttering near the car. And where do they fit in that reconfiguration? It was the question Thaddeus had been avoiding, not only in front of Serene but in front of himself. How to integrate two realities that seemed fundamentally incompatible. How to be the relentless businessman who had built an empire and simultaneously the present father his children deserved. "I'm working on it," he finally responded. "But I want you to know they're not an obligation for me, Serene. They are a revelation." She nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant to say. Perhaps she understood it better than he did himself. "Tomorrow is the school festival," she said, changing the subject. "The children are participating in the play about mythology. Griffin plays Zeus, and Gideon plays Poseidon." "I'll be there," promised Thaddeus without hesitation. As he drove back to his hotel, Thaddeus received a call from Percival. "The board of directors has convened an extraordinary meeting for tomorrow at 10, his assistant informed. "Darius Lockhart has raised his offer to 30% above market value. Several institutional shareholders have expressed their intention to accept if there isn't a clear stabilization plan. Your presence is—" He made a significant pause. "Imperative." Thaddeus looked at the dashboard clock. The school festival began at 9:30. There would be no way to be in both places. "Set up a video conference," he responded. "I'll participate remotely." "Thaddeus," Percival's voice reflected unusual concern, "I don't think that will be sufficient in these circumstances. The board needs to see you physically present to demonstrate your total commitment to the company at this critical moment." Silence extended as Thaddeus contemplated his options. For 15 years, there would have been no dilemma whatsoever. The company had always been his absolute priority, the gravitational center around which everything else orbited. "Set up the video conference, Percival," he finally repeated, "and prepare a press release announcing my intention to maintain majority control of Blackwood Developments. Include the announcement of a restructuring of the management team that will allow me to dedicate more time to strategic vision and less to daily management." After hanging up, Thaddeus stopped at a traffic light. In the car beside him, a man was singing animatedly with his 2 children in the back seats. An everyday scene, insignificant to any casual observer, but one that suddenly acquired a profound meaning for Thaddeus. Perhaps true success isn't measured by the buildings we construct on the skyline, but by the moments we build in the time we are given. Moments that, unlike steel and concrete, won't remain as visible monuments, but that shape souls in ways no physical structure ever could. Coastal Haven rose majestically on a cliff overlooking the ocean on the San Diego coast. The property, acquired by Thaddeus just a month earlier, combined traditional Californian architecture with modern touches that reflected his aesthetic sensibility. Large windows captured the golden light of sunset, projecting it onto cream marble floors and white walls. The infinity terrace, where the edge of the pool seemed to merge with the ocean horizon, had become Griffin and Gideon's favorite space during the weekends they now regularly spent with their father. This July Saturday was no different. The twins, equipped with life jackets despite their growing swimming abilities, competed to see who could make the most spectacular jump into the water. Thaddeus, seated under an umbrella with his laptop open, alternated between reviewing corporate documents and photographing his children's aquatic feats. The transition he had initiated 3 months ago was finally taking shape. He had restructured Blackwood Development's management team, delegating operational responsibilities to Alaric and Octavia, while maintaining strategic and creative control. His visits to San Diego, initially weekly, had become stays of 3 or 4 days each time. The acquisition of Coastal Haven had been the logical next step. "Dad, watch this," shouted Gideon, preparing for a particularly ambitious jump. Thaddeus looked up just in time to see his son launch into an imperfect but enthusiastic somersault. The word "dad," which the twins had begun to use just a month ago, still provoked an indescribable emotion every time he heard it. "Impressive," he applauded as Gideon emerged from the water with a triumphant smile. It wasn't until he caught Seren's surprised expression, seated on the other side of the pool with a book, that Thaddeus realized Brielle's presence. His fiancée, technically she still was, although their relationship had been in an undefined limbo for months, stood by the terrace entrance, observing the scene with a mixture of emotions that Thaddeus couldn't interpret. He immediately stood up, leaving the laptop aside. "Brielle," he said, approaching her, "I wasn't expecting you." "Evidently," she responded, her gaze scanning the family scene before her. "Percival mentioned you'd be here this weekend. I thought I'd surprise you." Thaddeus glanced towards Seren, who was now calling the children to get out of the pool. Griffin and Gideon obeyed, looking curiously at the newcomer as they wrapped themselves in towels. "Can we talk privately?" he suggested, indicating the interior of the house. Once in the main living room with its large windows framing the coastal landscape, Brielle removed her sunglasses, revealing tired eyes that contradicted her impeccable appearance. "So this is your new life," she commented, scanning the space with her gaze. "Beach house, family weekends, children calling you Dad." "Brielle, I know I should have called you, explained the situation better." "The situation?" she interrupted with a brief, humorless laugh. "It's been almost 4 months, Thaddeus. 4 months in which you've completely transformed your life without bothering to include me in that transformation." Thaddeus couldn't deny the truth in her words. After Brielle's departure from San Diego that first week, their communications had been limited to brief messages and sporadic calls, not for lack of consideration, but because every time he tried to explain what he was experiencing, words seemed inadequate. "You're right," he admitted. "I've handled this terribly with you." "It's not just how you've handled it," replied Brielle, approaching the window. "It's that I don't see myself in this new narrative you've created. I look at you out there with them, and I see a man I don't recognize." The observation surprised him, not because it was unfair, but because it reflected exactly what he himself had been feeling. A transformation so profound that sometimes he wondered if the person he had been for the last 15 years, the Thaddeus that Brielle had met and to whom she had become engaged, had simply been an incomplete version of himself. "I think I was always this man," he finally said. "I just didn't know it." Brielle looked at him for a long time, as if trying to reconcile the relentless businessman she had admired with the affectionate father she now saw. "Our wedding was scheduled for 2 months from now," she pointed out. "We had plans, Thaddeus. A life designed together." "I know," he responded softly, "and I never wanted to hurt you." "But you have," she said, with no reproach in her voice, just a statement of facts. "Not by finding your children, but by completely excluding me from that discovery, by not trusting that I could adapt to this change with you." The living room door opened slightly, and Gideon's head peeked in with childish curiosity. "Dad, Mom asks if your friend will stay for dinner," he said, studying Brielle with interest. Before Thaddeus could respond, Brielle stepped forward. "No, sweetie. I just came to visit your father for a moment. I was just leaving." She turned to Thaddeus. "I came because I needed to see with my own eyes what Seren described to me on the phone. I needed to understand why the man I planned to marry disappeared so completely." "Brielle—" "It's okay, Thaddeus," she interrupted with a sad smile. "I'm not here to recriminate anything, just to say goodbye properly and return this to you." She extracted a small velvet box from her purse that Thaddeus immediately recognized. "I deserve someone who makes me a priority in their life, not a footnote in someone else's story." With a gentle gesture, she left the box on the coffee table and headed toward the door where Gideon was still observing. She bent down slightly to be at his height. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Gideon. Take good care of your dad, okay? Sometimes he forgets what really matters." The boy nodded solemnly, as if he had just received a mission of great importance. When Brielle left, Thaddeus remained motionless by the window, contemplating the velvet box. He didn't feel the devastation he would have expected, but a strange mixture of relief and gratitude. Relief for the clarity her visit had brought, and gratitude for the dignity with which Brielle had handled a situation that he, with all his supposed ability to manage crises, had avoided confronting directly. Gideon approached him, and without saying a word, took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with a meaning that transcended any verbal articulation. Thaddeus gently squeezed the small hand in his, marveling at how natural that contact felt now, when just a few months ago he would have found such a display of physical affection disconcerting. Together they returned to the terrace, where Griffin had built an elaborate sandcastle next to the pool, and Seren was preparing lemonade at the outdoor table. The scene had a dreamlike quality under the golden light of the Mediterranean sunset. It wasn't the life Thaddeus had meticulously planned, but one that had revealed itself to him unexpectedly, like a treasure buried under years of singular ambition. "Everything okay?" asked Seren when they joined her. "Yes," replied Thaddeus with a certainty that surprised him. "Everything is exactly as it should be." That night, after putting the twins to bed and reading them the story they had selected, a tale about an architect who built magical houses, which Thaddeus had adapted specifically for them, he joined Seren on the terrace. The ocean stretched before them, a dark canvas speckled with the silver reflection of the moon. "Brielle is a brave woman," commented Seren, offering him a glass of wine. "To come here, face this situation head-on." "She is," confirmed Thaddeus. "She deserves much more than what I could offer her." "And what can you offer now, Thaddeus?" asked Seren, with genuine curiosity. "What is it that you really want?" The question hung suspended in the night air, charged with possibilities. Thaddeus contemplated the horizon, where the sky and sea merged into an indistinguishable darkness. "I want to be the father that Griffin and Gideon deserve," he finally responded. "The father that I myself would have needed. I want to be present for the important moments and the everyday ones. I want to build something that won't figure in any urban skyline, but that will endure long after my buildings have been replaced." Seren nodded, as if the answer didn't surprise her. "And your company? Your empire?" "It will still be there," said Thaddeus, "but it no longer defines who I am. It's just a part of me, not the totality." The silence that followed was filled with a mutual understanding that didn't need to be verbalized. It wasn't romantic love that existed between them now, but something perhaps deeper, a respect born of having seen the other grow and change, of sharing the most important responsibility of their lives. "The children have asked if they can spend more time here," mentioned Seren. "They love the house, the beach, and above all, they love being with you." Thaddeus felt a wave of emotion that he didn't try to contain. "I would like that more than anything," he responded. We could consider a more permanent arrangement, something that gives them stability but also more time with me." "I was thinking the same thing," admitted Seren. "I've received an offer to teach at UCLA next semester. It could be a good time to consider a change." The implication of her words floated between them, the possibility of a new family configuration, not based on romantic reconciliation, but on Griffin and Gideon's well-being. "We'll find a way," assured Thaddeus. Together, under the starry sky with the rhythmic sound of waves as a backdrop, two people who had once shared dreams and then disappointments began to trace the contours of an unexpected but deeply desired future. Sometimes destiny returns us to the starting point, not to repeat the same path, but to show us that there was always another possible route, one that was hidden from plain sight until we were ready to see it. The private laboratory occupied the ground floor of a discreet building in downtown Los Angeles. Despite the simplicity of its facade, its facilities housed cutting-edge technology for genetic and biochemical analyses. Thaddeus, seated in the waiting room with minimalist finishes, distractedly reviewed emails on his phone while waiting for the results. At his side, Griffin concentrated on reading an astronomy book, while Gideon drew elaborate patterns in a notebook. The twins, now completely comfortable in his presence, had accepted the simplified explanation about why they needed to take some special tests to better understand why Gideon had those moments when he seemed to be daydreaming. The door opened, and Dr. Olmedo entered with a tablet in hand. With her impeccable coat and professional but warm attitude, she sat across from them. "We have the complete results," she announced, addressing primarily Thaddeus. "As we expected, the analysis confirms paternity with a 99.9998% certainty for both children." Although Thaddeus had never really doubted this fact, the physical and personality traits were evidence enough. He felt a strange sense of official relief upon hearing the scientific confirmation. "And regarding Gideon's condition?" he asked. The doctor nodded, adjusting her glasses. "We've identified a specific genetic variant associated with childhood absence epilepsy. It's a mutation in the CACNA1H gene, which regulates calcium channels in neurons. She paused, briefly looking at the children before continuing. What's interesting is that both twins have the genetic variant, but only Gideon presents clinical manifestations. This isn't unusual in identical twins and tells us a lot about the interaction between genetics and other factors in the development of the condition. "Does that mean I could also have episodes like Gideon someday?" asked Griffin unexpectedly, demonstrating that he was paying more attention than he appeared to be. The doctor smiled. "Not necessarily. Your body has found ways to compensate for that genetic variant. But it helps us understand better how to treat your brother and what to watch for in both of you." Gideon, who had stopped drawing to listen, asked with the direct simplicity of childhood, "Will I be sick forever?" "You're not sick, Gideon," replied Dr. Olmedo gently. "Your brain simply functions in a slightly different way at certain moments. With the medication you're already taking, those episodes will become less and less frequent. And the best part is that many children completely outgrow this condition as they get older." Thaddeus observed the exchange with a mixture of admiration for the doctor's ability to communicate with children and pride in the maturity with which his children handled the situation. It was another reminder of the excellent upbringing Seren had provided them during the years he had been absent. "We've also completed the extended genetic profile you requested," continued the doctor, addressing Thaddeus again. "There are no other concerning hereditary conditions. Both children show genetic predisposition for advanced mathematical and spatial abilities, which isn't surprising considering their development and family background." After receiving detailed instructions on the recommended medical follow-up and scheduling the next checkup, Thaddeus and the twins left the building. The mid-afternoon sun bathed the streets of Los Angeles with a warm light that contrasted with the aseptic atmosphere of the laboratory. "Can we go to the park before going home?" asked Griffin. "Of course," replied Thaddeus. "And afterward we could stop by that ice cream shop you like in Grand Park." The twins' faces lit up with identical smiles of anticipation. It was amazing, thought Thaddeus, how these small pleasures, an ice cream, an hour in the park, generated such pure and complete happiness. For years, he had measured success in millions of dollars, in square meters built, in economic press headlines. Now, he found an incomparably greater satisfaction in the simple expression of joy from his children. At Grand Park, while the twins ran around the fountain chasing pigeons, Thaddeus received a call from Alaric. "Darius Lockhart has withdrawn his offer," announced his partner without preamble. "His investors have backed out after we published the second quarter results. It seems our new management structure has convinced the market." "Excellent news," replied Thaddeus, without taking his eyes off Griffin and Gideon, who were now trying to decide who could throw stones farther into the water. "There's more," continued Alaric. "The Singapore Consortium wants to resume negotiations. They're impressed with the conceptual design you sent last week. They say it's exactly the innovative vision they were looking for. Schedule a video conference for Tuesday," indicated Thaddeus, "and make sure Octavia is present. I want her to lead the financial negotiation." "Aren't you going to do it?" "I trust her judgment. And I need to be in San Diego that day for the end-of-year school play." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When Alaric spoke again, there was a nuance of curiosity in his voice. "I never thought I'd live to see the day when Thaddeus Blackwood would delegate a $100 million negotiation for a school play." "Neither did I," admitted Thaddeus with a smile. "Life is full of surprises." After hanging up, he joined the twins by the fountain. Gideon immediately showed him a leaf he had collected, enthusiastically explaining how its shape exactly resembled the treasure map he had drawn the day before. "Do you think it's a sign, Dad?" he asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "Definitely," replied Thaddeus with seriousness. "I think we should investigate." During the next half hour, they embarked on an elaborate, improvised treasure hunt, following clues invented on the spot. Thaddeus surprised himself by creating an increasingly complex story about ancient pirates who had hidden their loot in Los Angeles, centuries before the city had its current appearance. "But, Dad," interjected Griffin with relentless logic, "Los Angeles is very far from the sea. How did the pirates get here?" "Ah, that's the most interesting part of the story," replied Thaddeus without missing a beat. "You see, these weren't ordinary pirates. They were time pirates, who traveled not only across oceans but also through centuries." Gideon let out a cry of excitement at this unexpected twist, while Griffin seriously considered the new information, looking for inconsistencies in the narrative. At the end of the afternoon, as they returned home with chocolate ice creams and a treasure consisting of interesting stones and peculiarly shaped leaves, Thaddeus received a message from Seren. "How did it go at the laboratory?" "All good," he replied. "Complete confirmation and genetic profile with no surprises, except the predisposition to mathematics and spatial abilities. That explains why Griffin can mentally calculate the exact change in the store before the cashier," she responded with a smiling emoji. The naturalness of this exchange, the ease with which they now shared information and parental responsibilities, represented extraordinary progress from that tense conversation in the San Diego cafe months ago. That night, after putting the twins to bed in the room they had specifically decorated for them in his Los Angeles penthouse, with a hand-painted mural of planets on one wall and an elaborate miniature train circuit on the other, Thaddeus sat in his study. Before him, the plans for what would be Blackwood Development's most ambitious project to date, a sustainable residential complex on the outskirts of Los Angeles, designed to minimize the ecological footprint without sacrificing comfort. The concept had surprisingly emerged from a conversation with Griffin about why some clouds were white and others gray. That seemingly trivial chat had evolved into a discussion about pollution, which in turn had inspired Thaddeus to completely rethink his approach to urban residential projects. His phone vibrated with a notification, a photograph sent by Seren. It showed Griffin and Gideon during their recent trip to San Diego, playing on the beach with expressions of pure happiness. Below, a simple message, "Can't wait until we're all in the same city again." Thaddeus contemplated the image for a long time. Today's genetic test had officially confirmed what his heart already knew. These children were his in the strictest biological sense. But more importantly, what was truly transformative was that he now belonged to them in a way that transcended any genetic marker or legal document. Sometimes the most definitive tests of our identity aren't found in sophisticated laboratories or DNA analyses, but in those unexpected moments when we discover that we're capable of inventing stories about time pirates or finding treasures in fallen leaves simply because it illuminates the gaze of those who now give meaning to our existence. The annual presentation of Blackwood Developments was held in the main auditorium of the Los Angeles Convention Center. 400 guests, including investors, strategic partners, government representatives, and specialized media, occupied the seats as Thaddeus concluded his speech. The giant screens behind him showed spectacular renderings of the Terra Nova project, the sustainable complex he had conceived inspired by that conversation with Griffin. "This isn't simply another real estate development," he affirmed with the conviction that had always characterized his presentations. "It's a reimagining of how we can inhabit urban spaces in harmony with the natural environment. Each building produces more energy than it consumes, every drop of water is reused, and the common spaces are designed to foster a genuine sense of community." From the front row, Seren observed with a mixture of professional and personal pride. At her side, Griffin and Gideon, impeccable in their small formal suits, tried to maintain the solemn composure their mother had recommended for the occasion, although Gideon couldn't help swinging his legs, and Griffin constantly adjusted his new glasses, a recent addition that gave him a surprisingly mature air for his 6 years. It was the first time Thaddeus had included his family in a corporate event of such magnitude. The decision hadn't been taken lightly. It implied making public a part of his life that until then he had kept separate from his professional image. But after the success of the corporate restructuring and the consolidation of his new family routine, he felt it was time to fully integrate both aspects of his existence. "To conclude," he said, as the presentation showed an aerial image of the complete project, "Terra Nova represents not only the future of Blackwood Developments, but my personal vision of a legacy that transcends the purely architectural, a commitment to future generations, with sustainability not only environmental but social and emotional." His eyes briefly met Seren's, who nodded slightly, recognizing the underlying meaning in those words. It wasn't a statement directed solely at shareholders, but an affirmation of the personal transformation he had experienced. The speech was received with enthusiastic applause. As Thaddeus descended from the stage, several investors approached to congratulate him. Among them was Darius Lockhart, his former rival, who now extended a hand with what seemed like genuine respect. "An impressive vision, Blackwood," he conceded with his characteristic gruff tone. Different from anything you've done before. More human, I'd say. Thaddeus shook his hand. Priorities change, Lockhart. We evolve. So it seems, replied the businessman, directing a curious look towards Seren and the twins, who were waiting at a certain distance. Interesting family you have there. I didn't know you had children. There are many things you didn't know about me, responded Thaddeus, with an enigmatic smile. Perhaps that's why you never managed to buy my company. Lockhart laughed, not offended. Touché. We'll be watching Terra Nova. If you need a partner for Phase 2, Lockhart Investments might be interested. After saying goodbye to the last investor, Thaddeus finally rejoined his family. Gideon immediately launched himself into his arms, while Griffin, more reserved, waited his turn for a more contained but equally affectionate hug. "You were great, Dad," exclaimed Gideon. Everyone applauded so much. "The buildings on the screens were impressive," added Griffin with his characteristic analytical precision, "especially the rainwater collection system you explained. Can it really supply the entire complex?" "With the modifications we implemented last month, yes," confirmed Thaddeus, marveling once again at his son's capacity to remember technical details he had casually mentioned during breakfast weeks ago. Serene approached, elegant in a navy blue dress that contrasted with the lighter tone of her eyes. "Congratulations," she said sincerely. "Terra Nova is truly special." There was a complicity in her gaze that went beyond professional recognition. In recent months, as Seren settled in Los Angeles to begin her position at UCLA, they had developed a surprisingly harmonious dynamic. It wasn't a romantic reconciliation, both had advanced too far on their separate paths for that, but a partnership based on mutual respect and shared love for their children. The reception following the presentation took place in the center's gardens. Thaddeus, with Gideon still clinging to his hand and Griffin walking solemnly at his side, conversed with various groups, occasionally introducing his children with a pride he didn't try to disguise. Serene, meanwhile, had found former colleagues from the architecture faculty and was maintaining an animated discussion about sustainable urban trends. It was then that Percival approached with a worried expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he murmured discreetly, "but there's a situation that requires your immediate attention." Thaddeus excused himself and followed his assistant to a small adjacent conference room. There he found Alaric and Octavia, both with somber expressions. "What's happening?" he asked, immediately feeling that something serious had occurred. "We've just been notified of a class action lawsuit," explained Octavia, extending a tablet with legal documents. "The residents of Pacific Heights residences allege serious structural defects, leaks, cracks in the facades, electrical problems." Pacific Heights residences, a project completed 3 years ago on the San Diego coast, one of Blackwood Development's most ambitious to date. 3 luxury residential towers with more than 200 homes in total. "This is impossible," murmured Thaddeus, quickly reviewing the documentation. "That project passed all quality inspections. I personally supervised the critical phases." "Apparently, the problems began to manifest a few months ago," continued Alaric. "The materials used by the main subcontractor didn't meet the technical specifications, despite having apparently valid certifications." "Who was the subcontractor?" asked Thaddeus, although he already suspected the answer. "Lockhart Construction," confirmed Octavia, "a subsidiary of Lockhart Investments." The revelation fell like a bucket of cold water. Thaddeus clearly remembered questioning the choice of that provider, but the competitive budget and the guarantees offered had ended up convincing him. "What's the estimated magnitude of the problem?" "According to the preliminary reports, the complete repair could cost close to 70 million, responded Alaric, not counting the indemnifications to the owners and the reputational damage. "The worst is the timing," added Octavia. "Just when we're about to launch the pre-sale of Terra Nova, this could destroy potential buyers' confidence." Thaddeus ran a hand over his face, processing the implications. It was the worst crisis Blackwood Developments had faced in its 15 years of existence, and it came precisely when he had begun to find a balance between his professional and family life. "Dad?" Griffin's voice interrupted his thoughts. The boy was timidly peeking through the half-open door. "Mom says the magazine photographer wants to take the pictures now." Thaddeus tried to compose a reassuring smile. "I'll be there in a minute, Griffin. Can you tell your mother to wait for me?" The boy nodded, but didn't move. His eyes, sharp and observant behind the new glasses, studied the tense expressions of the adults in the room. "Has something bad happened?" he asked directly. Thaddeus exchanged a glance with his partners before responding. "Just a work problem, nothing to worry about." Griffin held his gaze a moment longer, as if evaluating the sincerity of the response, before nodding again and withdrawing. "I need a complete analysis by tomorrow morning," indicated Thaddeus, turning to his team. "I want to know exactly what failed when the problems began, and all available legal options, and I need a communication strategy to contain the reputational damage." "What do we do about the interview for Architectural Vanguard?" asked Percival. "They're waiting to talk to you and your family about the new Thaddeus Blackwood and your vision for Terra Nova." Thaddeus considered the situation. Cancelling the interview would generate immediate speculation, especially if news of the lawsuit leaked in the next few hours. "Let's stick to the plan," he decided. "But without mentioning Pacific Heights residences, let's focus exclusively on Terra Nova and the renewed commitment to quality and sustainability." When he returned to the gardens, he found Seren conversing calmly with the journalist, while the twins posed for the photographer next to an ornamental fountain. Upon seeing him, Gideon waved energetically, almost losing his balance in his enthusiasm. "Dad, we're going to be in a magazine," he exclaimed when Thaddeus approached. "That's right," he confirmed, striving to maintain a light tone. "It's important that you smile and behave like the gentleman you are." "I always behave," declared Griffin with dignity. "Of course," conceded Thaddeus, exchanging a knowing look with Seren, who had immediately noticed the tension in his expression. The interview proceeded without incident, with questions focused primarily on how fatherhood had influenced his architectural and business approach. Thaddeus answered with an honesty that surprised even Seren. "Discovering I was a father fundamentally changed my perspective on what we build and why," he explained to the journalist. "I no longer think just about impressive structures or profit margins, but about the kind of world we're creating for future generations. Every decision I make now is filtered through that question: what legacy am I leaving for my children?" The words, pronounced in the context of a promotional interview, acquired a deeper and more urgent meaning in light of the crisis he had just discovered. Pacific Heights residences wasn't just a financial or legal problem, it was a potential stain on the legacy he wanted to build, a betrayal of the principles he now claimed to defend. As he posed for the final photographs with Seren and the twins, a family composition that would have seemed unthinkable just a few months ago, Thaddeus felt the weight of responsibility as never before. It was no longer just about protecting a company or a professional reputation, but about demonstrating to his children that the words about integrity and commitment to quality were more than simple corporate rhetoric. "Are you okay?" whispered Seren when the photographer paused to adjust his equipment. "I'll tell you later," he responded quietly. "We have a serious problem with one of the previous projects." She nodded, not pressing for more details at that moment. It was another demonstration of the mutual understanding they had developed, of the respect for each other's spaces and responsibilities. Later, as the twins slept in the back seat of the car during the journey home, Thaddeus briefly explained the situation to her. Seren listened in silence, processing the implications both for the company and for the delicate family stability they had managed to establish. "Do you think Darius knew," she finally asked, "that he shook your hand today knowing perfectly well what was coming?" "Without a doubt," replied Thaddeus. "He's probably been waiting for the perfect moment for the bomb to explode, just when we're about to launch Terra Nova. What will you do?" Thaddeus contemplated the city lights through the window, reflecting on the available options. "Whatever is necessary to protect the company and resolve these families' problems," he finally responded, "even if that means personally assuming part of the costs." Seren studied his profile in the dim light of the car. The old Thaddeus would have immediately looked for a culprit, a way to deflect responsibility, she observed. "The old Thaddeus didn't have to worry about the example he set for his children," he replied, directing a glance toward the back seat where Griffin and Gideon slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm that was approaching. "Sometimes the true tests of character don't arrive when we're prepared for them, but precisely when we begin to believe we've found stability. It's in those moments of unexpected crisis when we discover if the changes we thought we had experienced are superficial or have penetrated to the core of who we are." The headquarters of Lockhart Investments occupied a glass and steel skyscraper in the financial district of Los Angeles. From the helipad on the rooftop, where Thaddeus's private helicopter had just landed, the view of the city was spectacular. However, he barely registered it as he followed an assistant to Darius Lockhart's office. The last 10 days had been a whirlwind of frantic activity: internal investigations, meetings with lawyers, consultations with structural experts, detailed financial analyses. Everything confirmed what Thaddeus had feared. The defects in Pacific Heights residences were serious and systematic, the product of a deliberate substitution of quality materials with inferior alternatives that did not meet the technical specifications. What was more disturbing was that the legal responsibility fell primarily on Blackwood Developments as the project developer, despite the fraud having been perpetrated by Lockhart Construction, the subcontractor. The contracts, meticulously drafted, included clauses that limited the subcontractor's liability and made it difficult to prove wrongful intent in their actions. Darius Lockhart's office perfectly reflected his personality: ostentatious, aggressive, designed to intimidate. The businessman, a stocky 60-year-old man with perfectly styled silver hair, awaited him standing next to a window that framed Blackwood Tower in the distance, a detail that could hardly be coincidental. "Thaddeus," he greeted with false cordiality. "What a surprise to receive your call. I thought you'd be too busy managing the Pacific Heights residences crisis." "We both know there's nothing surprising about my visit, Darius," replied Thaddeus, rejecting the seat offered and opting to remain standing. "You planned it meticulously, didn't you? Defective materials, falsified certifications, all calculated so the problems would begin to manifest now, just when we're launching Terra Nova." Lockhart smiled, not bothering to deny the accusations. "Business is business, Blackwood. You should know that better than anyone. For years you've been the prodigy child of the real estate sector, stealing my contracts, attracting my best talents, blocking my expansions. Did you really expect I wouldn't counterattack? By putting the safety of hundreds of families at risk?" Thaddeus kept his voice controlled, but the indignation was evident. "There are children living in those apartments, Darius." "Let's not dramatize," replied Lockhart, pouring himself a whiskey from a carved crystal decanter. "The defects are real, but the structures aren't at imminent risk of collapse. It's more a problem of comfort and property value than public safety. That's not what our technical reports indicate." "Your technical reports say exactly what you need them to say to justify your decisions," replied Lockhart, taking a sip of his drink. "Just like mine. It's the game we play, Thaddeus, or at least the game you used to play before your personal transformation." The last phrase was pronounced with barely disguised disdain. Thaddeus studied the man before him, recognizing in his arrogant attitude a reflection of what he himself had been not so long ago. The realization caused him deep discomfort. "What do you want exactly, Darius? I didn't come here to exchange business philosophies." Lockhart smiled, placing his glass on the desk and extracting a folder from a drawer. "Simple. I want Terra Nova." He slid the folder toward Thaddeus. "I've prepared an offer to acquire the complete project, including all associated intellectual property rights. In exchange, Lockhart Construction will publicly assume responsibility for the defects in Pacific Heights residences and cover 60% of the repair costs." Thaddeus opened the folder, quickly reviewing the terms. The offer was substantially below the project's real value, but sufficiently attractive considering the current crisis. "And if I reject the offer, then things will get complicated," replied Lockhart, his tone suddenly harder. "My lawyers are prepared to drag the case out for years. Meanwhile, Blackwood Development's reputation will be irreparably damaged. No potential buyer will trust your promises of quality and sustainability for Terra Nova when news about Pacific Heights residences is in all the media." He paused, studying Thaddeus's reaction. "Not to mention the effect all this will have on your new family responsibilities. I imagine managing a corporate crisis of this magnitude will require all your attention, leaving little time for—" "What are your children's names?" "Griffin and Gideon." The mention of his children sent a wave of cold fury through Thaddeus. He maintained his neutral expression with effort. "Don't bring my family into this. I'm just pointing out the practical consequences of your decision," replied Lockhart with feigned innocence. "After all, you've been publicly promoting your new balanced life, Your commitment to active fatherhood. It would be a shame if your children discovered that their father isn't so different from the ruthless businessman he's always been. Thaddeus closed the folder, considering his options. Surrendering Terra Nova would mean giving up the project that symbolized his personal and professional evolution, the legacy he had imagined for his children. But rejecting the offer would mean facing a prolonged and costly legal battle, with a devastating impact on the company and, potentially, on the stability he had managed to build for his family. "I need time to consider the offer," he finally said. "You have 48 hours," replied Lockhart, reclining in his chair with the satisfaction of someone who knows they have the advantage. "After that, my lawyers will present additional evidence that will significantly complicate your legal position." The playground buzzed with activity under the afternoon sun. From the bench where he sat, Thaddeus watched Griffin and Gideon play on the swings, their laughter mixing with that of other children. It was their weekly exclusive time with Dad, a tradition they had established since Seren had moved to Los Angeles 3 months ago. "Dad, look how high!" shouted Gideon, swinging enthusiastically on the swing. "Be careful," he automatically responded, although he knew his children were surprisingly capable and prudent for their age. His mind kept returning to the meeting with Lockhart that morning and the subsequent discussion with his management team. Opinions were divided. Alaric advocated accepting the offer and minimizing the damage, while Octavia argued for fighting, trusting that Blackwood Development's established reputation would prevail in the long term. "You're very thoughtful," commented a familiar voice. Thaddeus turned to find Seren sitting beside him with a grocery bag in hand. "I thought I'd bring them a snack before heading to the university," she explained, extracting juices and sandwiches. "The children are always hungry after playing." "Thank you," replied Thaddeus, grateful for the consideration. "I was thinking of picking up something on the way home, but this is much better." Seren studied him carefully. "The meeting with Lockhart didn't go well, I suppose." "It went exactly as I expected," confirmed Thaddeus. "He wants Terra Nova in exchange for assuming part of the responsibility for Pacific Heights residences. And you're considering accepting," she affirmed, not as a question but as an observation. Thaddeus nodded slowly. "Financially, it might be the most sensible option. It would minimize losses, preserve the company's reputation in the long term. But it's not what you want to do." "No, it's not." Thaddeus observed the twins, who had now moved to the slides. "Terra Nova represents everything I've learned in this last year, everything I want Blackwood Developments to be in the future. Handing it over to Lockhart, knowing he'll turn it into another generic development, maximizing profits at the expense of quality and sustainability, would destroy you," completed Seren. "But rejecting the offer means a prolonged legal battle, negative publicity, possible financial problems." He paused. "It would mean less time with Griffin and Gideon, when they're just getting accustomed to our new family dynamic." Seren followed his gaze toward the children, who were now interacting with other small ones in an improvised game. "Do you remember when I told you why I didn't tell you about the pregnancy?" she asked after a moment. "You said you feared that with my financial power, I would try to obtain full custody," recalled Thaddeus. "That was part of the truth," admitted Seren. "But there was something deeper. I feared that you would teach them the same values that guided your life then, that success is measured in acquisitions, that obstacles are to be eliminated, not ethically overcome, that the end justifies the means." Thaddeus nodded, not offended by the harsh assessment of his former self. "You were right to worry. But I no longer worry," she continued, "because I've seen how you've changed. I've seen how you look at them, how you really listen to them, how you prioritize their well-being over your own ambitions." She made a significant pause. "The children see it too, Thaddeus. They see every decision you make, every commitment you keep or break. They're constantly learning from you, not just from what you say but from what you do when facing difficulties." Her words resonated deeply. Thaddeus remembered Griffin's expression when he won the mathematics competition, the mixture of pride and nervousness with which he had sought his approval. He remembered how Gideon had asked his advice on whether he should share his toys with a classmate who wasn't always kind to him, and how he had listened attentively to his response about generosity and strength. "If I accept Lockhart's offer, I'll be teaching them that when things get tough, it's acceptable to compromise your principles," he reflected. "And if you reject it, you'll teach them that standing up for what you believe is right is worth it, even when it has a personal cost," added Seren. But I could also be teaching them that work can consume a father to the point of not being present, argued Thaddeus, verbalizing his deepest fear. Seren shook her head. Only if you allow that to happen. There's more than one way to fight, Thaddeus. You can delegate, you can establish limits, you can show them that it's possible to maintain your commitments to them even during a professional crisis. The twins, having spotted their mother, were now running toward them with expressions of joyful surprise. "Mom, we didn't know you were coming," exclaimed Griffin, arriving first. "She brought food," added Gideon, immediately noticing the snack bag. As the children devoured the sandwiches and animatedly related their adventures in the park, Thaddeus observed the scene with renewed clarity. The decision he faced wasn't really between saving his company or being a good father. It was between teaching his children to yield to intimidation or showing them how to face adversity with integrity. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Thaddeus locked himself in his study. He spent hours reviewing contracts, studying technical reports, analyzing legal precedents. When dawn began to break, he had a completely formed alternative plan. At 9 o'clock sharp, he called Percival. "Convene a meeting with the legal and management team for this afternoon," he instructed, "and schedule a visit to Pacific Heights residences for tomorrow. I want to meet personally with the affected residents." "Have you decided to reject Lockhart's offer?" asked his assistant. "I've decided to do the right thing," replied Thaddeus, "and to teach my children that some battles, although difficult, are worth fighting. Sometimes the most difficult decisions aren't really between right and wrong, but between easy and right. And it's precisely in those crucial moments, when the path of least resistance seems so tempting, that we define not only who we are, but who those who observe and learn from our example might become." The community room at Pacific Heights residences was packed. Residents of the 3 affected buildings, some with expressions of evident frustration, others with contained concern, had responded to Thaddeus Blackwood's personal invitation. News of the structural defects had created a wave of anxiety in the community, exacerbated by rumors and sensationalist media coverage. Thaddeus, standing before the expectant audience, scanned the faces around him. Young families, older couples, single professionals, people who had invested their savings and placed their trust in Blackwood developments, buying apartments that now faced significant devaluation and habitability problems. "First, I want to thank you for coming," he began, not hiding behind a podium or an elaborate presentation. "And second, I want to apologize. As CEO and founder of Blackwood Developments, I take full responsibility for the construction defects in these buildings." A murmur ran through the room. This wasn't the typical corporate approach of evasion and minimization that many expected. "I'm not going to bore you with technical excuses or legal explanations about subcontractors," continued Thaddeus. "What matters is that you bought homes with the legitimate expectation of quality and safety, and that expectation hasn't been met. That's unacceptable." He then projected on the screen behind him a detailed rehabilitation plan. "This is our commitment. Blackwood Developments will finance the complete repair of all structural defects, following the recommendations of an independent panel of engineers. During the rehabilitation process, which we estimate will take between 8 and 10 months, we will provide alternative accommodation for families who need to relocate temporarily." Expressions of surprise and disbelief multiplied. A middle-aged woman raised her hand. "Who guarantees that the repairs will be adequate this time? Why should we trust you again?" It was a valid question, formulated without hostility, but with justified skepticism. "I'm not asking you to trust blindly," replied Thaddeus. "That's why the plan includes the formation of a resident committee that will oversee the entire process, with complete access to technical documentation, contracts with new suppliers, and quality controls. Additionally, an international auditing company will independently verify each phase of the rehabilitation." During the next hour, Thaddeus answered questions, listened to specific concerns, and adjusted aspects of the plan based on the feedback received. He didn't dodge criticism or appear defensive. To the surprise of many residents, he seemed genuinely interested in their experiences and determined to rectify the situation. At the end of the meeting, several owners approached to speak personally with him. Among them, a young man with a baby in his arms. "My wife and I bought our apartment when we found out we were expecting Sophia," he explained, pointing to the little one sleeping peacefully against his chest. We wanted a safe place, with good facilities where she could grow up. When the problems with the leak started, his voice broke slightly. It was devastating to think we had failed in our first big decision as parents. Thaddeus felt the impact of those words as something physical. He looked at the sleeping baby and thought of Griffin and Gideon, of how he would feel if someone put at risk the safety of the home he had created for them. "I promise you we'll fix this," he responded with a sincerity that surprised even Octavia, who was accompanying him at the meeting. Not as a corporation fulfilling a legal obligation, but as a father who understands what it means to want to protect your children. When they finally left Pacific Heights residences, well into the night, Octavia expressed what many on the management team were thinking. "This isn't the strategy the lawyers recommended," she pointed out as they got into the car. "Assuming complete responsibility, financing all repairs without litigation. The costs will be astronomical." "They will be," confirmed Thaddeus, "but the cost of not doing it would be much greater in the long term." "Darius Lockhart will be furious," she added, with a slight smile. "His plan depended on you trying to evade responsibilities or accepting his offer for Terra Nova." "Let him be furious," replied Thaddeus. "Meanwhile, we'll initiate legal action against Lockhart Construction for fraud in material certifications. We won't recover all the money, but we'll establish a precedent." During the journey back to Los Angeles, Thaddeus received a call from Seren. "The children wanted to say good night to you," she explained. "They're especially excited because tomorrow is Bring Your Parents to School Day." Thaddeus felt a pang of guilt. With the Pacific Heights residences crisis, he had completely forgotten about the school event. "I'll be there," he promised, mentally calculating how to reorganize his schedule for the next day. "Are you sure? I know you're in the middle of a complicated situation." "Absolutely sure," he confirmed. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." Westwood Academy, where the twins had started the school year after their move from San Diego, vibrated with the characteristic energy of the annual Bring Your Parents to School Day event. Parents from diverse professions shared their work experiences with the students, adapting complex explanations for children's understanding. Thaddeus, seated next to Seren in small chairs designed for 6-year-old children, proudly watched as Gideon explained to his classmates that his mom taught adults how to write incredible stories, and his dad built buildings so tall they almost touched the clouds. "And now," continued the teacher enthusiastically, "Griffin and Gideon's parents will talk to us about their jobs. Who wants to go first?" Serene stepped forward, quickly captivating the little ones with an interactive explanation about how stories are everywhere, not just in books, but in movies, video games, and even in buildings, which tell stories with shapes and spaces instead of words. When his turn came, Thaddeus had planned a simple presentation on architecture, with images of some of his most emblematic buildings. However, upon seeing the curious faces before him, he decided to take a different approach. "My job is to create spaces where people can live, work, and be happy," he began. "But the most important part isn't the buildings themselves, but making sure they're safe and well built." He took from his briefcase several building blocks he had borrowed from the twins' collection that morning. "When we build something, it's like when you make a tower with blocks. If the foundation isn't solid," he demonstrated by placing unstable blocks that quickly collapsed, provoking laughter among the children. "No matter how beautiful the tower is, it will eventually have problems." He rebuilt the structure, this time with a solid foundation and carefully balanced. "The most important thing I've learned in my job is that sometimes we make mistakes. And when that happens, we have to fix them, even if it's difficult or costly." His eyes briefly met Griffin's, who was observing him with that reflective intensity so characteristic of him. "Have you ever built a building that fell down?" asked a girl in the front row. "Fortunately not," replied Thaddeus with a smile. "But I'm currently helping to repair some buildings that have problems because the correct materials weren't used. It's as if someone had used Play-Doh instead of firm blocks for some parts of the structure." "And how are you going to fix it?" insisted the little girl. "By replacing the weak parts with strong materials, one by one, while the people who live there are safe in other places," he explained, simplifying the complex rehabilitation process. "And who pays for all that?" interjected another boy, with surprising economic insight. Thaddeus couldn't help but laugh at the direct question. "Me and my company," he responded honestly. Because when you build something, you're responsible for making sure it works correctly. It's part of doing things right. At the end of the session, as the children moved on to an artistic activity, the teacher approached Thaddeus and Seren. "That was a wonderful explanation," she commented. "Very appropriate for their age, but without underestimating their capacity for understanding." She paused, with a slightly uncomfortable expression. "I've seen the news about Pacific Heights residences. It must be a difficult situation." "It is," confirmed Thaddeus, "but it's also an opportunity to demonstrate that we value integrity more than short-term profits." "Griffin mentioned something about it yesterday," added the teacher. "He said his dad was fixing an important mistake because it's the right thing to do, even though some wanted him to cheat." She smiled at the childish simplification. "You're both very lucky." The twins are extraordinarily perceptive and empathetic for their age. As they watched Griffin and Gideon participate in the artistic activity, Seren leaned toward Thaddeus. "They're attentive to everything you do," she murmured. "They absorb every decision, every attitude, even when you think they're not paying attention." "I know," he replied. "It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time." At that moment, his phone discreetly vibrated. It was a message from Percival. "Lockhart has issued a statement denying any knowledge of the defects in the materials. His lawyers have contacted offering an out-of-court settlement." Thaddeus smiled, putting the phone away without responding. Lockhart's reaction was predictable. Upon seeing that his pressure strategy had failed, he was now trying to minimize the reputational and legal damage. "Good news?" asked Seren, noticing his expression. "Let's say integrity is beginning to bear fruit faster than expected," he replied. "I'll tell you the details later." At the end of the event, as they said goodbye to the twins in the school courtyard, Griffin approached his father with a serious expression. "Are you really going to fix all the buildings that have problems?" he asked. "Yes," confirmed Thaddeus. "It will take time and be costly, but it's the right thing to do." Griffin nodded, processing the information with his characteristic meticulousness. "I'm proud of you, Dad," he finally said, with a seriousness that contrasted with his small stature. Thaddeus felt something expand in his chest, an emotion so intense it was almost painful. In all his years of professional success, with awards, recognitions, and accumulated fortunes, he had never experienced the profound satisfaction that those simple words provoked in him. He knelt to be at his son's height and hugged him briefly. "Thank you, Griffin. That means a lot to me." As he watched the twins return to the school building, Thaddeus understood with crystal clarity that he was in the process of rebuilding not only the defective foundations of Pacific Heights residences, but also those of his own life, transforming values and priorities that he once considered immovable. Sometimes rebuilding what has been damaged requires more courage and vision than building something new from scratch. And in that process of repair, we discover that the most important foundations aren't those of steel and concrete that support our physical structures, but the principles and values that support our decisions and define the legacy we leave to those who observe us with hopeful eyes and impressionable hearts. The main auditorium at UCLA presented an imposing aspect with its seats completely occupied. Academics, students, real estate professionals, and representatives of environmental organizations had come to attend the conference titled Sustainable Architecture, Reconciling Profitability and Responsibility, organized by the department where Seren had been teaching for 6 months. In the front row, Griffin and Gideon waited with contained impatience, dressed in identical shirts but in different colors, blue for Griffin, green for Gideon, a system they had developed themselves to help others distinguish them. At their side, Percival discreetly ensured that the twins remained entertained with the books and small silent games he had specifically brought for the occasion. Thaddeus, backstage, mentally reviewed the key points of his presentation, while Seren adjusted the microphone on the lapel of his jacket. "You're nervous," she observed with surprise. "I don't remember ever seeing you nervous before a public presentation." "This one is different," he admitted. "I'm not here as CEO of Blackwood Developments, promoting a new project or celebrating a success. I'm exposing vulnerabilities, mistakes, lessons learned, and that's why it will be the most valuable one you've given," replied Seren, stepping back to evaluate him. "Perfect. The Dean is about to introduce you." The last 6 months had been intense. The rehabilitation of Pacific Heights residences was progressing as scheduled, with a resident committee actively supervising each phase. The out-of-court settlement with Lockhart Construction had allowed recovering part of the costs, although the greater financial burden still fell on Blackwood Developments. In parallel, Terra Nova had begun its construction after a successful pre-sale phase, with a waiting list that surprised even the most optimistic on the team. Now, one of the most innovative businessmen in the American real estate sector, who has recently demonstrated that business ethics and profitability are not mutually exclusive, the dean was concluding his introduction. Please welcome Thaddeus Blackwood. Applause resonated as Thaddeus advanced toward the podium. From there, he could clearly see his children, who were applauding with disproportionate enthusiasm, provoking some smiles among nearby attendees. "Thank you for that generous introduction," began Thaddeus, "although I must confess that just a year ago I probably wouldn't have included the word ethics so prominently in my professional biography." Contained laughter ran through the auditorium. "For 15 years I built Blackwood Developments with a singular vision: to create impressive structures, maximize profitability, expand markets. Success was measured in square meters built, in profit margins, in economic press headlines. It was an effective vision from a certain perspective, but fundamentally incomplete." The screens behind him showed images of some of his most emblematic projects, culminating with Pacific Heights residences. This development in particular represented a turning point for me and my company. When we discovered the structural defects caused by inadequate materials, I faced a decision that would test my fundamental values: minimize losses and protect corporate reputation in the short term, or assume complete responsibility with a significant financial cost. With surprising honesty for many of those present, Thaddeus detailed the crisis, the temptation to accept easy solutions, and the eventual decision to prioritize integrity over immediate benefit. He didn't mention Darius Lockhart by name, but described the pressures and conflicts of interest that characterize the sector. What I discovered in that process was that true value isn't reflected in quarterly reports or stock quotes. True value resides in the trust we build, in the positive impact we generate, in the integrity with which we face our mistakes. The screens changed to now show images of Terra Nova, with its innovative renewable energy systems, water management, and community spaces. This new project represents not only an evolution in sustainable design, but a transformation in business philosophy. Every decision, from material selection to labor policies, is filtered through a fundamental question: is this something we could be proud of 20 years from now? His gaze briefly turned toward Griffin and Gideon, who were watching him attentively. "Because in the end, the buildings we construct will remain long after us, silently telling the story of our priorities, values, and vision. What story do we want them to tell?" During the next hour, Thaddeus presented concrete data on how sustainability and corporate social responsibility could align with long-term profitability. He shared specific metrics from Pacific Heights residences and Terra Nova, demonstrating that transparency and proactive error repair, although initially costly, generated tangible and intangible benefits that far outweighed those costs. When it was time for questions, a graduate student raised her hand. "Your personal and professional transformation coincided with the discovery that you had children," she pointed out. "Do you consider that fatherhood was the main catalyst for this change in perspective?" It was a perceptive question that touched the core of his evolution. Thaddeus reflected for a moment before responding. "Fatherhood didn't create values that didn't previously exist in me," he replied carefully. "Rather, it acted as a powerful amplifier that forced me to examine beliefs and priorities I had taken for granted for years. Suddenly, decisions that seemed purely professional acquired an unavoidable personal dimension." He paused, seeking a way to articulate something deeply personal in an academic context. "When my children ask me about my work, when I try to explain concepts like responsibility or integrity to them, I was constantly confronted with the gap between what I taught them and how I acted in certain business contexts. That dissonance became increasingly unsustainable." Another hand was raised, this time belonging to a middle-aged businessman who introduced himself as the founder of a medium-sized construction company. "Your principles sound admirable in theory," he commented with evident skepticism, "but in practice, aren't you putting your company at a competitive disadvantage? In a sector where margins are tight and competition fierce, don't you fear that others less scrupulous might surpass you? It was precisely the type of question Thaddeus himself would have formulated not so long ago. Far from making him uncomfortable, it provided the opportunity to address a legitimate concern. It's a valid concern, he acknowledged, but the question assumes a false dichotomy between ethics and competitiveness. What we've discovered is that integrity translates into customer loyalty, into attraction and retention of talent, into more stable relationships with suppliers and authorities. He projected a graph showing Blackwood Development's evolution during the last year. Here you can see the financial results before and after our corporate transformation. The first quarter after the Pacific Heights Residences case, we experienced a significant contraction, as expected. However, the following 3 quarters show a consistent recovery, with profit margins that have already surpassed our historical levels. He pointed to an ascending red line. But more relevant than purely financial indicators is this other data: brand valuation and consumer confidence. We've experienced a 47% increase in qualified job applications, reduced staff turnover by 62%, and secured preferential financing for Terra Nova precisely because investors recognize the long-term value of our approach. The skeptical businessman nodded, not completely convinced but clearly interested in the data presented. The last question came from an older woman seated near the back, who identified herself as a professor emeritus of business ethics. Mr. Blackwood, you've spoken eloquently about your personal and professional transformation. What advice would you offer to young professionals starting out in the sector so they don't need a crisis or a personal revelation to adopt these principles from the beginning? Thaddeus smiled, appreciating the depth of the question. I would tell them to constantly question the success narrative they've inherited, to regularly ask themselves not only if they're advancing in their objectives, but if those objectives remain valid as they evolve as people. And above all, to remember that at the end of their careers, they won't remember with greater satisfaction the contracts signed or the profits generated, but the moments when they stood up for something important, when they built something of genuine value, when they acted with integrity when it would have been easier not to. As applause filled the auditorium, his gaze fell once again on Griffin and Gideon. Gideon was applauding with contagious enthusiasm, while Griffin watched him with an expression of contained pride that was an exact reflection of the one Thaddeus had seen so many times on Seren's face. After the conference, while greeting attendees and answering additional questions, Thaddeus noticed that the twins were surrounded by a small group of students who seemed fascinated by the sketches Griffin had been drawing during the presentation. "Does your dad let you visit the construction sites?" a student was asking, admiring a surprisingly detailed drawing of a structure that Thaddeus recognized as Terra Nova. "Sometimes," replied Griffin seriously, "but we have to wear helmets, and we can't run or touch anything. They're safety rules." "I prefer finished buildings," interjected Gideon. "They have fountains and gardens and people living in them. Construction sites are just boring skeletons." The naturalness with which the twins conversed with the students, sharing their unique perspectives on their father's work, moved Thaddeus in an unexpected way. In just a year, they had gone from being complete strangers to integrating so fully into his life that it was difficult to imagine a time when they weren't present. Later, during dinner at a restaurant near the university, Seren raised her glass in a toast. "To an extraordinary conference," she said. "Honest, inspiring, and potentially transformative for many of those young people." "To Dad," added Griffin, solemnly raising his juice glass. "To buildings that don't fall down," exclaimed Gideon, provoking laughter around the table. Thaddeus observed the smiling faces around him, feeling a fullness that transcended any professional success. The transition hadn't been easy. The path from that fortuitous encounter at the airport to this moment had been full of challenges, difficult decisions, and deep reconsiderations about what he truly valued. "To second chances," he finally said, raising his glass, "and to the people who help us recognize them when they appear before us." His gaze met Serene's, silently communicating a gratitude that went beyond words. Not for the romantic love they once shared, but for the wisdom and patience with which she had guided his re-entry into their children's lives, allowing him to discover facets of himself that had remained dormant for decades. As dinner continued, with Griffin enthusiastically explaining a school project on renewable energies, and Gideon interspersing the conversation with surprisingly perceptive observations, Thaddeus reflected on how his definition of value had changed. Once he had calculated his worth in terms of acquisitions, contracts, and recognitions. Now he understood that true value resided in the human connections he built, in the trust he inspired, in the example he offered his children, and in the integrity with which he faced each decision, big or small. Sometimes the most important journey isn't the one that takes us to conquer new territories or accumulate greater wealth, but the one that leads us back to our fundamental truths, those that were always there, patiently waiting for us to be ready to recognize them as the authentic measure of a life well lived. Exactly 1 year had passed since that encounter at the airport that had irrevocably altered the course of so many lives. Los Angeles International Airport gleamed under the same golden light of sunset, but for Thaddeus Blackwood, the man now walking through its corridors was not the same one who had been there 12 months ago. This time, he didn't advance with the controlled rigidity of the businessman perpetually pending the next contract, but with the relaxed presence of someone who had found a more authentic balance. At his side, Griffin and Gideon ran around with the irrepressible energy characteristic of their 6 years, occasionally stopping to admire planes through the enormous windows. "How much longer until Grandma's plane arrives?" asked Gideon, jumping to better see the information on the screens. 20 minutes, replied Thaddeus, checking his watch, a gesture he no longer performed compulsively, but only when truly necessary. "And according to the app, it will land on time." Eleanor Winters, Seren's mother, was traveling from San Diego to spend a month with them in Los Angeles. The relationship between Thaddeus and his ex-mother-in-law had been tense during their marriage, marked by subtle disapprovals of his lifestyle exclusively oriented toward work. The reunion, facilitated by the twins, had initially been uncomfortable, but had gradually evolved toward mutual respect based on the shared recognition of Thaddeus's transformation. "Do you remember the last time we were here, Dad?" Griffin suddenly asked, adjusting his glasses as he observed the flow of travelers. The question took Thaddeus by surprise. The twins knew they had met a year ago, but the specific details of the airport encounter had never been explicitly discussed. "I remember it very well," he replied carefully. "It was a very important day for me." "Mom says you froze like a statue when you saw us," commented Gideon, with the direct frankness that characterized him, "and that afterward you tried to chase us, but we hid behind some suitcases." Thaddeus looked at his children, surprised by the naturalness with which they spoke of a moment that had been so dramatic for the adults involved. "That's true," he admitted. "I was very surprised to see you. I didn't know you existed." "Were you sad?" asked Gideon. "Not sad," corrected Thaddeus, carefully choosing his words. "Surprised, confused, and afterward very happy, because I discovered something wonderful that I didn't know I was looking for." Griffin observed him with that analytical intensity that seemed to penetrate directly to the truth of things. "And is that why you broke up with Brielle?" "Because you found us." Another direct question that deserved an honest but age-appropriate answer. "Brielle and I broke up because our lives took different directions," explained Thaddeus. "Finding you helped me realize what was truly important to me, and that meant changes in many aspects of my life." The twins processed this information in silence, with the seriousness they sometimes assumed when discussing topics they perceived as important. "Do you think if you hadn't seen us that day you would never have met us?" finally asked Griffin. The hypothetical question hit Thaddeus with unexpected force. What would have happened if their paths hadn't crossed that day? If Seren had managed to leave the airport unseen? Would he have continued his life exactly as planned, marrying Brielle, expanding his business empire, completely unaware of the existence of these two extraordinary beings who now gave meaning to each of his days? "I think somehow at some point we would have found each other," he responded, with a certainty that surprised even himself. "There are connections that are too important for fate to leave to chance." Gideon seemed satisfied with this answer, but Griffin maintained his thoughtful gaze a moment longer. "Are you happy that we found each other?" he finally asked. Thaddeus knelt to be at his children's height, looking them directly in the eyes, those eyes so identical to his own. "Yeah, it's the best thing that's happened in my life," he responded with an emotion he didn't try to disguise. "Every day, even the difficult ones, I feel grateful for having found you." The moment was interrupted by the announcement of the arrival of the flight from San Diego. The twins immediately returned to their usual energy, animatedly discussing what gifts their grandmother might bring them this time. As they waited by the arrivals gate, Thaddeus received a message from Seren. "Everything okay? Plane on time?" "On time. Kids excited. Everything under control," he responded, adding a smiling emoji, a communicative habit he had recently adopted, and that still provoked occasional jokes from Percival about who had kidnapped the real Thaddeus Blackwood. The response came immediately. "Perfect. I finish class at 7. See you at home for dinner. The reservation on the terrace is confirmed for Saturday." Saturday, the exact anniversary of the airport encounter. Seren and he had planned a special celebration, gathering the people who had been an important part of this transformative year. Alaric and Octavia, who had supported the company's restructuring despite their initial doubts. Percival, whose loyalty had transcended the professional toward genuine friendship. Dr. Westbrook, who supervised Gideon's successful treatment, and even the twins' teacher, whose insight had significantly contributed to the children's school integration after their move to Los Angeles. Passengers began to emerge through the arrival gates. Eleanor Winters, an elegant 70-year-old woman with the same amber tone in her eyes that characterized Seren, appeared pushing her suitcase. Upon seeing her grandchildren run toward her, her face lit up with a radiant smile. "My treasures," she exclaimed, embracing them simultaneously. "How much you've grown in just 2 months." Thaddeus approached to greet her, receiving a warm hug that notably contrasted with the formality that had characterized their interactions for years. "Thank you for coming, Eleanor," he said sincerely. "The children have been counting the days." "So have I," she responded, with an appreciative look that evaluated the subtle changes in him since their last meeting. "You look good, Thaddeus. Fatherhood suits you." "Constant practice helps," he joked, taking the suitcase to head toward the exit. As they advanced along the same corridor where everything had begun a year earlier, Thaddeus experienced a strange sensation of déjà vu. The same lights, the same bustle of travelers, the same golden glow of sunset filtering through the windows, but all perceived through a completely different lens. "Do you know what day Saturday is, Grandma?" asked Gideon, jumping beside her. "Of course I do," replied Eleanor with a knowing wink toward Thaddeus. "It's a very special day." "It's when Dad saw us for the first time," explained Griffin, "exactly 1 year ago. And we're going to have a party on the building terrace with cake and balloons," added Gideon enthusiastically. "And Dad says he has a special surprise." Eleanor directed a questioning look toward Thaddeus, who simply smiled enigmatically. The surprise he had prepared for the celebration was something he had been planning for months, a project that perfectly symbolized the full circle his life had traced during the last year. The terrace of the building where Thaddeus had recently acquired a penthouse for his permanent family in Los Angeles offered panoramic views of the city, with Blackwood Tower standing out in the urban skyline. Elegantly arranged tables, soft lighting, and a play area carefully installed for the children transformed the space into the perfect setting for the celebration. The guests conversed animatedly as the sun began its descent, tinting the sky with reddish and golden hues identical to those that had bathed the airport that fateful day. Seren, radiant in a turquoise dress, approached Thaddeus, who was discreetly observing Griffin explaining something with great seriousness to Alaric, who listened with genuine interest. "Everything has turned out perfect," she commented, handing him a glass of champagne. "The children are delighted. Your team seems relaxed for the first time in years, and my mother just confessed to me that she finally finds you tolerable. Coming from her, that's practically a declaration of eternal affection." Thaddeus laughed, grateful for Seren's ability to find humor in the evolution of their complex family dynamics. "Are you ready for the surprise?" he asked, checking his watch. "Is it going to arrive flying?" she joked. "You've been extremely mysterious about it." "Not exactly flying," he replied with a smile, but with a certain theatricality. At a discreet signal, Percival approached the small podium installed at one end of the terrace. With his usual efficiency, he called the attention of those present and gave the floor to Thaddeus. "Thank you all for joining us in this very special celebration," he began, feeling an inner calm that notably contrasted with the tension he used to experience during his corporate presentations. "Exactly 1 year ago, my life irrevocably changed in an airport. It was a moment that, in retrospect, divided my existence into a before and after. His eyes briefly rested on the twins, who were watching him attentively from their table, next to their grandmother. During this year, I've learned more about myself, about what I truly value, and about the kind of legacy I want to build than in all previous years combined. And that transformation has been possible thanks to the people on this terrace, especially two small architects of chaos and joy, who taught me that the most important blueprints aren't those that design buildings, but those that trace paths to the heart. A murmur of approval ran through the audience. Serene, at his side, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and contained emotion. The surprise I've prepared for today is, in a way, a symbol of this journey. He signaled toward the terrace entrance, where Octavia appeared pushing a cart covered with a blue velvet cloth. It's a project that began as a personal idea, but has evolved to become something much more significant. When the cart reached the podium, Thaddeus removed the cloth with a fluid gesture, revealing an exquisitely detailed architectural model. It wasn't an impressive skyscraper or a luxury residential complex, but something completely different. A community center with educational spaces, green areas, and recreational zones, designed with elements that subtly evoked Griffin's imaginary creations and Gideon's fantastic drawings. "This is the Blackwood Family Center," he explained, as those present approached to appreciate the details. "Our space specifically designed for non-conventional families like ours, separated parents who actively co-parent, reconstituted families, grandparents who assume parental roles. The center will offer educational support, legal counseling, spaces for shared activities, and specific programs to facilitate family transitions." He paused, observing Serene's reaction, whose eyes shone with barely contained emotion. "Most importantly, this center will be built on land strategically located between our two main residences, perfectly symbolizing the bridge we've built between worlds that once seemed irreconcilable." The twins had approached to examine the model with fascination. Griffin meticulously studied each architectural detail, while Gideon enthusiastically pointed to an area he recognized as inspired by one of his drawings. "Is this real, Dad?" asked Griffin with an expression that mixed amazement and pride. "Are they really going to build it?" "Absolutely real," confirmed Thaddeus. "Construction begins next month, and the best part is that it won't just be a Blackwood Developments project." He turned toward Serene, extending a folder he had discreetly kept at his side. "Serene Winters will be the director of the educational and cultural program, contributing her academic experience and her incomparable sensitivity to understand the needs of families in transition." Serene accepted the folder with slightly trembling hands, opening it to find a formal contract that officialized this professional collaboration, a recognition not only of her capabilities, but also of the wisdom with which she had managed her own complex family situation. "This is," she began, visibly moved. "Thaddeus, it's perfect. It combines exactly what we both can contribute. And there's something else," he added, addressing the audience again. "The Blackwood Family Center will be the first of a national network. 10% of Blackwood Development's future profits will be allocated to expand this model to other cities, creating spaces where families in all their forms can find support and resources." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Alaric, initially skeptical about any initiative that would divert resources from traditional business objectives, was now smiling with approval. Eleanor Winters, observing from her table, finally seemed to see in Thaddeus the man she had always hoped her daughter would find. But the most significant reactions were those of Griffin and Gideon, who contemplated the model with expressions that mixed pride, amazement, and an intuitive understanding of what this project represented. The physical materialization of their father's transformation, a tangible bridge between his past and his future. "Can we help design the playgrounds?" asked Gideon, already visualizing possibilities. "And the library," Griffin immediately added. "It will need many books on architecture and science." "Your ideas will be fundamental," assured Thaddeus, moved by their immediate enthusiasm. "After all, this center exists thanks to you." As the celebration continued, with animated conversations around the model and the twins proudly explaining to the guests the elements they recognized as inspired by their ideas, Thaddeus found himself a moment alone by the edge of the terrace. From there, he contemplated the Los Angeles skyline, the city he had helped shape with his buildings, but which, in turn, had transformed him in ways he would never have imagined. Serene joined him silently, her presence familiar and comforting. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "Circles," he responded, "about how sometimes we need to travel a complete path to arrive at the point where we should have been from the beginning." She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I don't think you would have been ready before," she commented. "Some lessons require time, experience, and perhaps a little intervention from destiny." In the distance, the sun completed its descent, bathing the city in hues that perfectly evoked that sunset at the airport. But unlike that day, when Thaddeus's world had crumbled before an unexpected revelation, now he felt a solidity and certainty that transcended any physical construction he had erected. "Dad! Mom!" called Gideon from the main table. "The cake is ready." Thaddeus and Serene exchanged a knowing smile before joining the celebration. The cake, decorated with a stylized representation of the airport and small figures symbolizing their fortuitous encounter, provoked exclamations of admiration and appreciative laughter. As Griffin and Gideon blew out the candles together, making a secret wish with that perfect synchronization that sometimes seemed almost magical, Thaddeus experienced a crystal clarity about the true meaning of success. It didn't reside in the buildings he had constructed or the fortune he had accumulated, but in these moments of genuine connection, in the unconventional but deeply loving family they had built, and in the legacy of values he could now transmit with authenticity. The secret revealed at the airport a year ago hadn't simply been the existence of two children until then unknown to him. The real secret, the one that had irrevocably transformed his life, was the revelation that the most significant wealth could never be accounted for in financial balances or admired in urban skylines. It was there before him, in the identical smiles of Griffin and Gideon as they shared their celebration cake, in Serene's hand, briefly resting on his shoulder in a gesture of complicity, in the faces of friends and collaborators united to celebrate not a business achievement, but a human journey of rediscovery and reconnection. And as night fell over Los Angeles, enveloping the terrace in a soft twilight illuminated by strategically arranged warm lights, Thaddeus Blackwood, builder of empires, designer of skylines, and now, finally, architect of his own authentic destiny, understood that he had found the most important blueprint of all, the one that traced the path toward a life of genuine meaning. Sometimes, the most unexpected encounters lead us exactly where we needed to be, and the secrets that initially seem to crumble our careful constructions turn out to be ultimately the foundations upon which we can build a much more solid, authentic, and fulfilling existence than we could ever have imagined possible.